Ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, welcome to the Discourse for today, February 3rd, 2022. I'm your host, Tristan. Hello! Hello, Chatland! How's everybody doing? How's everyone's Friday going? I'm absolutely fucking buried in snow. I had to, what's it called? It's negative 13, and I had to, shove a friggin', what's it called? A stroller with a baby in it, like a kilometer to fucking daycare in the middle of a fucking snowstorm. It was super fun, but I'm here now. Hello. It's an absolutely insane day. But hello, my name's Tristan. I'm the host of this channel, Step Back, which you can find at stepbackhistory.com. And I am the co-host of the podcast It's Probably Not Aliens at probsnotaliens.com. I stream on Fridays at noon from 12 till 2 Eastern, which is what you're watching right now. And if you want to support this stream and my work, you can do a couple of things. You can go to nebula.tv/stepback and sign up for Nebula. It's a pretty good price. You get a pretty good value of bonus content for a whole bunch of creators that I know that you're a fan of. And what's it called? And if you sign up using, if you sign up by going to nebula.tv/stepback, you will help me as long as you are a member of it. You can also support through Patreon at patreon.com/stepbackhistory. For as little as 84 cents a month, you get bonus content and all sorts of fun stuff. If you have Amazon Prime, you get one free Twitch Prime subscription per month. If you use that on Step Back, I would be very grateful. I get money and it costs you nothing. And if you have, if you want to be super generous, things like super chats, bits, and Twitch subscriptions are all welcome and appreciated. Thank you so much. But of course, never a requirement. My latest video, which came out a few days ago, is called There Have Always Been Trans People. Very proud of that video, I gotta say. I enjoyed making it. The response to it has been great. I've been very proud of how people seem to like it. And even though it had a bit of a rocky start, it's having a real comeback. It's getting a lot of views right now, which is very, very good. To the point where it's almost becoming it started off being a well below average performing video, and it's quickly turning into a successful video, which is pretty great. I'm glad that people have come out to support such a project that I cared a lot about, obviously. What else can I say? My next video is going to be coming out at the end of February. I'm working on it right now. It's called... the current working title I have is Okay, Fine, I'll Talk About Ancient Apocalypse. And that should be coming out near the end of February for everybody. So it's my big... Because approximately everybody asked me to talk about Ancient Apocalypse, so I'm finally just going to talk about Ancient Apocalypse. It should be coming out at the end of February. At the same time, I'm also working on a video that's going to put Step Back into the Nebula First cycle. So one of the things we're going to start seeing this year is that Nebula creators are moving to a thing where we're going to try and get ourselves one video ahead, so that if you watch a video on YouTube, you can watch the next video that's going to come out. It's going to come out like the next video is already up, and it's going to be up on Nebula. So, yeah. Not so, what's it called? For all you people on Nebula, you'll be getting 2 videos this month, hopefully, because I'm going to be doing another video on the Iraq War, because it'll come out on YouTube at the end of March. So it'll be around the time of the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. Whew, that's rough. Yeah. So, that's that. If you want to submit questions for future streams, I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can submit, I think even this stream, depending upon how, questions go. When I don't have Mia, which I don't have Mia today, Mia's busy and can only really come every other time. But I'm going to, I get through questions a lot faster, usually. But yeah, Ancient Apocalypse like the Kurzgesagt video. Yeah, basically. Well, not the Kurzgesagt video. No. I'm responding to Ancient Apocalypse, which was a Netflix documentary that came out in November. And it's basically a whole bunch of pseudo-archaeology trying to make this extremely fraudulent claim about there being a hidden advanced civilization that existed in the Ice Age. That comes from the fact that Graham Hancock doesn't understand archaeology, basically. So we'll talk about that. Graham Hancock is a famous person in the pseudo archaeology space, and I'm making it because everybody asked me to talk about it, and I want to use it as a platform to talk about It's Probably Not Aliens, to get people listening to that. Speaking of Kurzgesagt, yay or nay? There's different ways of talking about that channel. I don't want to burn any bridges or anything like that, but they're usually factually pretty sound, as far as I can tell. They have a little bit of a neoliberal bent to them, but that's hardly the highest crime that one can commit. And so yeah, sometimes their takes are a little bit not what I would say, but they they have some fun, interesting stuff to talk about. But that's that. At the very least, it seems like they are well-meaning. So at the very the most unforgiving way that I could say is that I think they're wrong, but I don't think they're malicious. So I don't really want to be too mean to them, if you know what I mean. Because I tend to save my ire not so much for people who are wrong, but for people who are malicious and who are either scamming people or are trying to, stoke hatred or something like that. And I don't think Kurzgesagt's doing any of that. I just think that they believe. I just think that the team that runs Kurzgesagt is just a little bit, just a little bit neoliberal, which honestly is not a high crime, because neoliberalism is basically the reigning default ideology of the planet Earth right now, and is sort of the political position of least resistance. So I don't know. I don't know how well-meaning you can be while being funded by Bill Gates. Again, complicated. Bill Gates obviously does a lot of things that I think are unethical and are skeezy, but also does a lot of things that are not unethical and not skeezy. Trying to get rid of guinea worm. You might disagree with a lot of the sort of way that he's approaching a lot of his healthcare philanthropy things. Why are rich people trying to control who does and does not get medicine? And why are they trying to be in control of everything? But, the general idea of guinea worm is bad and we should get rid of it is not a bad position to have. And so, again, if you're like most people where your politics are just, the most convenient or the thing that requires the least amount of, social friction to believe, then yeah, fairly often you're going to end up with a position default neoliberalism, that kind of thing. I mean, let's just say there's people like Elon Musk in the world who exist, and in the grand scheme of things, what Bill Gates is doing with his money is far less malicious than what Elon Musk is doing with his money, right? And you know what? Even on that front, Elon Musk is a fucking, right-wing weirdo who spreads fascist conspiracy theories, but is also, his money and fame is literally been behind driving the normalization of electric vehicles in a huge way and also their company gave away a whole lot of their patents, which would have arguably moved the technology of electric vehicles forward. Again, everybody's complicated. That's just I don't want to what's it called? I don't want to, obviously there's a lot of issues too, but I don't want to like. This is the discourse. I am not and everybody who knows me that I see. Do you see a man bun on my head? Without a man, I tend to try and talk about things that I know about and try to have takes that are lukewarm at best, because I like to sort of just chew on ideas and talk about them and to be complicated and be annoying in that sense, because it's hard to really take a hard and fast position on everything. Capitalism does suck. I agree. It is a terrible way of organizing an economy. It's a terrible way to organize an economy, and the only reason why things are the way they are is because capitalism basically was a political ideology or a socioeconomic ideology built up around the material conditions of colonization, and never really has stopped. They just found new ways of colonizing, sort of this default idea that there is constantly new territory to expand into and expropriate resources from. And even though, it's changed form several times, that is still the core of the capitalist project, trying to find new ways, new commons to draw fences around and charge money for. Try to financialize everything, trying to turn everything into a commodity, and, then suck money and value out of the system through that. It's predatory, parasitic, and as we are now getting into a line of, we're getting into a space where the over-extraction of resources and over-industrialization has caused the world to basically collapse, the world economic system to collapse, and at its core is a fundamental paradox that doesn't really have a resolution, because capitalism at its core has two chief driving motives. One is that consumers put money into the system through purchasing goods and services on a free market, the way that our world works. The other is that the most optimal way to increase profit margins is to decrease the amount of expenses. So essentially, there's like an Ouroboros thing going on, that you're trying to maximize money coming in and minimize money going out. But minimizing money going out often involves underpaying employees, and therefore the amount of money that goes out to, the base of people who then have the money to buy the things that you are selling is always going to be shrinking. And so there's sort of like this internal contradiction at the core of capitalism that at some point will break. Man, I got really distracted from that. I wrote a video about it last summer, about how capitalism or how capitalism makes you lonely, and about how one of the sort of dark sides, well, one of the many dark sides, but one of the sort of lasting effects of the pandemic that I'm concerned about is that because we spent so much time socially isolated from others, the only way that we communicated with each other was through different forms of communications technology that are owned by private entities. We stopped hanging out with our friends and we started hanging out on Discord, or various other platforms, which is basically meaning that a lot of our social interaction which was already drifting towards all of it being facilitated by rent seekers, which is basically, like every social media platform, people trying to make money off of the human social drive to communicate. And then accelerated it to the point where if you're in a world where everyone has less and less disposable income, then the platforms that will increasingly try to monetize their control over human interaction will make it harder and harder for you to have human interaction, which will make you lonelier and lonelier and makes us miserable. So that's all the idea. I have no idea what he's talking about, says Mr. Smith. I agree. I also think that. I also have no idea what I'm talking about. I just sort of heard a comment about capitalism being bad, and it led me to like a, 10-minute conversation about why capitalism is bad. What's my favorite real-time strategy game? My bet is Age of Empires 2. I actually didn't play a lot of Age of Empires. Actually, I don't think I've ever played it. But the real-time strategy game that I think I put the most amount of like mental effort into actively playing and getting better at and enjoying was StarCraft 2. When StarCraft 2 was in its beta and when it was in its first sort of, before the first expansion, so during the Wings of Liberty time, I played it a lot, especially in like the summer of 2010, because it was between college and university, so I had a lot of time, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and this new game was like, really taking over my brain, so I was playing a lot of StarCraft 2, like a lot. So that'll answer your question real fast. Hard same. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Let's see what questions we've got. I've got a handful. I'm just trying to let a few more questions get handed in, just because I've got a handful of questions, but they're from like the same like 4 people who, while I appreciate you guys constantly keeping me fed with questions, it's a lot of like, I wanted to see if I give some other people a chance to also submit questions if they'd like. What do I think about Peter Diamandis? I'm unsure about him because of his friends Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. I actually don't know who that is, which is probably embarrassing. Oh, did someone give a gift sub? Let's check this out. One of the things I did not do today, which I should have done, if I was good at YouTube, would be to open all of the things so I can actually like watch the actual stuff going on, because I just didn't open my like control panel for the different streams. I just started streaming, which, this is the first time that's happened to me. Okay. Live, there we are. And I'm very good. For everyone who doesn't know, I am extraordinarily good at YouTube. And remember to do basic things all the time. You'd be surprised how many times I make an entire video and patrons... I make an entire video and then patrons will point out when I make the video that I like left some like glaring problem in there that I have to fix before it comes out to everybody else. So Anonymous Gifter gave out 1 community sub. Well, that's very kind of you, Anonymous Gifter. I appreciate you doing that. All right. Anyways, let's look at some questions. Okay. First one, 255. Let's see. What did you mean last stream when you said we might find out new stuff about Emperor Nero down the line that changes how we view him? I listened to an ancient history podcast hosted by a PhD classical historian. Something I've heard about him say a few times is classical history is about reinterpreting existing sources, not finding new ones, because the ancient sources we have right now are basically all the ones we'll ever have. Mention archaeology, but archaeologists generally find artifacts, not texts. Parchment and paper decay so easy that a written source was not intentionally preserved down the centuries is probably lost to us forever. So if our view of Emperor Nero changed, it'd have to come from either a drastic reinterpretation of the existing sources or a truly miraculous archaeological discovery, or both. Well, that wasn't really a question. Yeah, those are the two things. Correct. Those are the two things that could happen. That's why I said it. Demandus is a futurist and good friends with Ray Kurzweil. He comes across as a nice guy, and he's friends with Peter Thiel, who hates democracy. Yeah, that's not a good sign. Ray Kurzweil's also... maybe he's somebody to talk about sometime, because Ray Kurzweil is a futurist who banks on like a lot of like techno-salvationism type thinking, and also always seems to have grotesquely inflated timetables on when all of these like emerging technologies are going to hockey puck. Like, I feel like according to Ray Kurzweil, we should have been in the like technological singularity like 5 years ago. So Did century anarchists really think they'd trigger a revolution by assassinating random royals? Did they kill the most conventionally attractive one on purpose? I don't think they... I don't know about... so the idea that you're thinking of is called propaganda of the deed, which was that if you create enough political chaos, then you will basically spark a revolution. Obviously, it was not the most correct thing in the world, but there was a lot of people who thought that, like a lot of anarchists in the turn of the century who believed that basically the only things that were keeping people in line and obeying the state were, you know, the authority figures in power. And if you weaken them by like taking out important authority figures and causing government chaos, that you would spark movements of people overthrowing the government and, you know, starting their own projects. It's a little misguided, and also doesn't factor into a lot of the ways that human tribalism is, you know, stronger than they seem to think, and results in you know, it results in a lot of ideas that didn't necessarily turn out to be true, because we tend to be tribal, and when we see somebody do, and we're well trained that when we see people doing acts of terrorism, we don't necessarily want to take their side. U.S. Congress voted to condemn socialism. Yeah, I heard about this. I heard that it won with like overwhelming support from both parties, which like shows that, wow, all the people who think that the Democrats are, you know, allies of the left in, you know, a future of politics are either have a lot more work to do than they think, or realize that, you know, the future of the socialist movement is not necessarily in the Democratic Party. And just shows that, you know, neoliberalism still has a pretty tight grip on the Democratic Party, even with some changing of the guard. Capitalism is lonely. I drove to work earlier and there was congestion in traffic. Why can't we take the train? Carpool. I think our political system needs to incorporate eco-friendly sustainability. Sure, yeah. Problem though is that if you have individual trains and carpools, then car companies can't sell you cars. And if they can't sell you cars, then that is lower in profits. So can't have that. The problem is that with a neoliberal ideology, the entirety of our political, like, the political project of the current like prevailing political ideology of countries like Canada and the United States is that the government's role is to basically open up the free market as much as humanly possible. And things like public transit hurt the free market, and so therefore they're not something worth investing in. But, you know, that is liberalism in a nutshell. Liberalism is the the focus on the advancement of markets and capitalism above all else. No matter how many people need to die, no matter how much the biosphere suffers, the only important thing is the number must keep going up. I mean, look at COVID. Neoliberalism met COVID, and their first instinct was to kill as many people as needed to die to make sure that the economy did not stop growing. And even then, that didn't work, so... Ninth mass extinction, complex life will be extinct by 2026. I do not share your pessimism on that front. I feel like 2026 is, in less than 3 years, that seems, or in 3 years, that feels a little excessive. Not gonna lie. I definitely think that there's, there's still a lot to do, but there's also, wasn't the Republicans that said sacrifice your grandparents? This is true, but then the Democrats took over and sacrificed people's grandparents anyway. Like, that's the difference. Like, the difference between, like, Republicans and Democrats when it comes to their ideology is very minor. They just have different branding. The Republicans just said, yes, we're going to kill all these people so that we can keep the number going up. And the Democrats just don't say that and do it anyway. Like, the Democratic, most left-wing president since FDR, as people say, Joe Biden, ended the COVID emergency like earlier this week, which essentially means that like emergency funds that are sent for handling this once in a century pandemic that has killed over 1 million Americans, he thinks is over, despite the fact that infection rates are way up. People are still dying to the tune of about 3,000 people a week, and all of the healthcare systems are overrun. All of the logistics infrastructure is completely fucked up, and yet this is no longer an emergency. Why is that? Because capitalism. They need to make more money, and they don't want the government to be, intervening in the markets to say, suggest people stay at home from work when, so many managers want to keep their rental labor going to the office so that they can be forced to laugh at their terrible jokes. So. Let's see. What is classical liberalism? Classical liberalism, I don't know if Noam Chomsky is definitely not using the right term there. I don't think anymore. So here's the thing. Here's what liberalism is, or classical liberalism. So liberalism, the sort of belief in the ideology that was sprung up around this system of slavery, conquest, and colonization. That is, at its core, that is what liberalism is. If you look at its origins, think about it like the idea of when liberalism became a thing, which was in the late 18th century. It was when the feudal landed aristocracy of Europe started to come into conflict with a sort of wealthy capitalist class that started to become more rich and powerful through colonization, through slavery, through conquest, those kinds of things. They became the first liberals, and they developed an entire, the way that sort of ideology works is ideology is essentially the system of norms and ideas and beliefs that you build up in order to justify your place at the top of the economic hierarchy. Liberals who were not of the landed aristocracy, i.e. they did not have inheritance that gave them their money, believed that they had to think of a new form of justification for their exploitation of slave labor and wage labor. And what they came up with was liberalism, which is this idea that, they earned it through hard work and dedication and wiles and guiles and all those kinds of things. And they believed in an ideology that supported, those kinds of people rising to power, i.e., free speech, freedom of things, because they wanted to undo all of these sort of broad things that kind of kept these institutions in power. Freedom of religion came from the idea that they did not want a state religion that had authority over their wealth, because a lot of those state religions existed to keep and entrench the power of the aristocracy. They believed in free markets because they were anti-mercantilism, which was a very state-controlled, or at least state-managed part of the trade networks of the Atlantic world in the early colonial period. And that, they wanted to circumvent all of those tariffs and controls that all of the government, i.e. the aristocracy, had control over. And 3, they believed in things like, these freedom, these ideas that everyone should be free to express themselves, to do this and that, because they thought that, their ideology had built up that their independence and cleverness and all those kinds of things are what gave them their position of privilege. And they overthrew and built this whole ideology around it. So classical liberalism is sort of what was born out of that revolutionary situation. So think about the reigning political ideology of a period like the 1800s, where there was essentially no government control over any forms of the economy. So people were sending children to go work in mines, or operating factories in extremely dangerous conditions. No safety standards, no quality standards, nothing at all. Everybody was eating rotten meat, eating bread that had sawdust in it, dying in unregulated factories, getting their arms sawed off in horrible big industrial machinery. But it didn't matter, because the government's ideology was to keep the role of the state out of the clever wiles of the clever brains of all of these capitalists that are making the world run. So there was this, and of course they would use things like racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and all those sorts of things to further subjugate people, and through dividing their workers, give them an even lower pay. So that they could further entrench their power base, because really that's the whole thing. So then there was a big sea change, mostly because of socialist movements that came up as the class that had as the liberal to go straight into classical Marxist language. This class of capitalists, called collectively the bourgeoisie, established themselves as the ruling ideology and those who are entrenched in the power structure of the economy. Then the class that they exploit for cash organized under their own movement, which was the socialist movement. And a lot of that led to a lot of periods of unrest and revolution and such in the 1800s and early 1900s. And the real thing that only stopped it is, one, the abandoning of any sort of left-wing socialism, which was done by the killing of Rosa Luxemburg and the sort of death of the leftist movement in Germany after the revolution in 1918. But and the sort of de facto leadership of the socialist movement being taken over by a extremely authoritarian, heavy-fisted iron fist of Soviet-style communism, where the communist movement basically became synonymous with megalomaniacal authoritarian dictatorships. So that sort of really tamped down a lot of left-wing activism, and at the same time, a lot of sort of privileged parts of the working class got benefited through a lot of grand bargains made between liberal capitalist governments and the people, i.e. like, you know, white male people gave up a lot of their like more radical positions in order to be given, you know, very stable jobs and, you know, some social services and stuff like that. All that is to be said, the Great Depression, which caused a lot of governments by necessity to intervene in the government, because the Great Depression was caused by classical liberalism basically collapsing in on itself because it's a fundamentally unstable economic structure. And the result was a whole bunch of like heavy government interventions. And you sort of created this like Keynesian mid-century style of liberalism, which was sort of this interventionist, but also, you know, trying to grease the wheels of the economy, basically. But it meant that the government was involved, a lot more regulation for safety, for quality, all those kinds of things to make it more consumer friendly. But then, so classical liberalism was the sort of ideology before, which is that the government should basically have nothing to do with anything except for war and peace. Like, basically, the government's job is to maintain the police at home and the army abroad, and that's it. And that went away in the 20th century because the government started to implement all these programs to counter all of the horrible excesses of the classical liberal state. You know, all of those, like, you know, the child labor, the unsafe conditions, the horrible working conditions, all those kinds of things, because it was leading to a socialist revolution. So they clamped down on a bunch of those. And then they also, you know, did a bunch more of, like, you know, social programs and things like that to maintain a more stable working base. So so a lot of, like, what happened is that in the 1970s, when that system started to stagnate because of various different causes, a lot of them had to do with the sort of spike in fuel prices, but there was a lot of, like, you know, issues with reaching this sort of like half measure bargain, because a lot of the grand bargain that sort of stopped the West from having a lot of socialist revolutions were done by basically handing over shit tons of money to a certain, like, you know, middle class of people, or to create basically a middle class of people. And that, like, entering of so much money into the economy caused a bunch of inflation, and it caused, like, it started to slow down in the 1970s as, like, a lot of it was dependent on the United States specifically, but a lot of Western countries having the industrial dominion over the world, especially in the wake of World War II. That started to become less of a thing in the 1970s, and so things became much more, much like the sort of like prosperity was starting to slow down, if not stagnate. And that led to some people who had always existed and were sort of building an intellectual project, who were trying to claim that all of those interventions that started in the 1930s and sort of created all of the sort of reigning ideological stuff of the 1950s and 60s, that is to blame for this slowing down of prosperity. And on top of that, because they also needed to blame other people, because, you know, classical liberalism is all about using like all of various different types of prejudices and hatreds in order to divide working people, in order to pay certain people less, in something called hyper-exploitation. But either way, that intellectual project, which had a lot of very rich people on board, started to build an intellectual project behind it. And in the 1970s, that started to become more the norm, and you started having more leaders who re-embraced classical liberal ideas and became what is sort of the longer term neoclassical liberal ideas, which has been shortened to neoliberalism. The idea that we need to refocus on the market above all else, you know. And that has sort of been the reigning ideology since about the late 1970s. And so that's sort of the place of where they are at. So somebody who calls himself a classical liberal is somebody who's trying to hearken back to that pre early 20th century ideology of the government should basically have no stance in anything, because neoliberalism has tried its best to roll back all of the progress made by all of these sort of grand bargain Keynesians in the middle century, but haven't been able to do so completely because some of them are just far too popular programs. Like neoliberals haven't been able to roll back the Civil Rights Act actually has been written back, but things like, getting rid of all the social services has been unpopular, so they just sort of make them so weak that they're virtually useless. But, the overall project long enough is to go back to a period where all of the classical liberal dreams can come true of no more safety standards, no more quality standards, no more labor standards. So people can start, there already are, compared to the 1950s, 1960s, a lot more people who are working 6 days a week, who are working way more than 40 hours a week, who are getting paid way less than they need to survive, and don't have any of the sort of benefits that they need to function in society. And even so, they're trying to roll even more of that back over and over and over again. So, but the problem is that it's been a victim of its own success, because as capitalism, as the neoliberal system becomes more and more entrenched and starts to devour all of these things built in the middle of the 20th century, they're going to run into the same problem that the classical liberals had in the late 19th century, which was creating all of these worker-led groups of people who are, who are against this just naked exploitation of their labor. And I think that we've sort of hit a tipping point where the neoliberal project has rolled back enough of the social safety net that people are starting to become more agitated about it. So that's what a classical liberal is. Dear God, why do you guys watch me? That was just the longest answer to the smallest question. But yeah. All right, next up, what's the next question we got here? How do we stop the far right from co-opting being anti-NATO that is seen with figures like Le Pen and somewhat with Orban? Good question. I don't know. I feel like there should be a pretty solid, the argument against NATO should be pretty strong for a left-wing argument. My guess is that you don't have to have one side own that. The far right, on a long enough time scale, will the right-wing attempt to support Russia in the war and be anti-NATO, I feel like doesn't have wings, because that goes against the hegemon's main source of economic power, which is America's weapons arms trading industry. And it's definitely I feel like it's a holdover from Trump's influence over a lot of far right politics, but I don't think it has longevity because it's not really based on I don't know. Can I comment at all on the Cop City stuff going on in Atlanta? No, I haven't really looked into it. My son got sick this week, so he just went back to daycare today after taking 2.5 days off. So I haven't been able to, do much else since Monday. So I don't really know a lot of what's going on. The only news story I really picked up is that I think that people are talking that Gina Haspel might be thinking about in a couple weeks announcing that she's running for leadership of the Republican Party, that she's running for president of the Republicans. Gina Haspel was one of Trump's appointees to, was it DHS? She was former director of the CIA. That was it. She was Trump's director of the CIA. She should be known because she, when asked about a whole bunch of stuff to do with the kids in cages, she used the Nuremberg defense of just following orders. And I made a whole video back in 2018 about how that is not an applicable answer. But there is talk about how she might be running for president, which would be, ugh. You know how the 1% can hoard all the money for generations while exploiting the working class and still sleep at night? Basically, I think that most political ideologies are developed specifically to be able to sleep at night. Like liberalism, the whole idea that they are, like, I feel like that's why they're so invested in this idea that they earned their money, that they worked hard and they were clever and they thought of all these ingenious ideas and they didn't just get lucky or, you know, inherit wealth, that they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps to do something amazing. That whole ideology at the core of, like, you know, the liberal project is, I think, the main thing that they do to keep them sleeping at night. Is they just convince themselves that they're like one of the smartest people who have ever lived. Yeah, as McBain said, they sleep on a top of a pile of money with many beautiful women. Exactly. All right, let's see. I keep hearing that French is on the decline. Quebec says it to justify that discriminate against non-French speakers. And even in France, people in Macron's party say it, often when complaining about Islamo-Marxism. However, I recall you saying there's a predicted upswing in French speakers in this century as an expected population boom happens in West Africa. Is there an actual decline in French speakers happening, or is there just a francophone version of the Great Replacement anxiety? I think that in many ways, I think that there might be, like, French as a first language is probably declining right now, just because of, like, a lot of, like, especially like in France, I think is what a lot of that reference to, but also in Quebec. Quebec and France definitely have negative replacement rates and low birth rates among their populations. And that, I think in the context of those situations, that's why they're saying that that French is declining as a language in those countries. And also, one of the reasons they definitely talk about it is because French people define their ethnicity a lot more with what language they speak rather than what bloodline they come from or whatever. But it's obvious. So it's obviously racist in the sense that it's short-sighted, because it also doesn't notice that, you know, that countries like Sierra Leone, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and all those things are poised to have a massive population boom, but that's also, you know, years away. So if you're, you know, panicking that much about the French language, the existence of the French language, it's usually in a very, like, you know, rarefied, you know, refined, you know, European sense, and not in the sense of, like, the language's health overall in the world, where there are several countries that have large populations and are poised to have much larger populations in the years to come that speak French, at least as a good chunk of their language. Because, yeah, a lot of the population boom of the 21st century is expected to happen once sort of the market begins to integrate countries like, you know, basically like what's happened, like basically what happened in China with China's, like, industrial, like, revolution that happened in the 20th century, which caused a huge population boom. And as like, you know, rising living conditions and more money means that people have more, like, you know, are able to have more kids safely as they move from, like, you know, subsistence work to much more like, you know, a much more industrialized economy. And there are parts of West Africa that are very remote that are starting to really, really like come online in that sense, especially as China starts to outsource its own labor to a lot of countries on the African continent. And the biggest, and some of the ones that are poised to have that big change, because they haven't really had it yet, are countries like Sierra Leone, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, trying to think of some other ones, Senegal, like those countries. And as that happens, they're going to have huge population booms, and there's going to be like lots and lots and lots of the population growth in the world is going to be happening in West Africa. At the same time, a lot of the rest of the world, as it's becoming more entrenched and industrialized, sort of goes into post-industrial times where the population begins to decline. And because, you know, of replacement rates and stuff like that, because as people become more educated and more, and live a sort of higher standard of living, they actually tend to slow down their reproductive rates, and it eventually gets to a negative population growth, like in many European countries, and, you know, like is happening here and is happening in China even to an extent. That's why we're kind of getting to this point where like we've just passed 8 billion people as a population, but the idea is that we're probably going to cap at around 9 billion people. And a lot of that population growth is not happening in the same place all at once. So the next like billion people are going to be born in places where the population's expanding very fast, which is in places like West Africa and in India. Those are the sort of big places. Because this year it's expected that India's population is going to be higher than China's. That's sort of like one of the things that's predicted to happen in 2023. And so, but as they also reach a sort of point in industrialization and such like that, they will also have a decline, or their growth will slow down and begin to decline, but not before it'll be several decades before that sort of chart sort of goes through. But yeah, a lot of what you're talking about here with like Quebec and Quebec always, you know, stumps on its politics about French being under threat, because the entire Quebec nationalist sort of narrative is about protecting its language from the encroachment of English from Canada and the United States. And France is just mad that brown people exist. So yeah, it's part of that whole thing. I am curious about like some of the stuff is already kind of coming online. Like I don't know if you guys have seen, but like there's been a higher proportion of like the first sort of country to come to really come online in West Africa in the last few years has been Nigeria. Nigeria is now like almost one of the most populous countries on earth. I think it has a population now almost equivalent with the United States. Let me just check real quick, because I don't have a man bun, so I like to check things before I say things. Yeah, Nigeria is now the 6th most populated country on earth with 218 million people, which is behind only the United States, Indonesia, and Pakistan when it comes to, and you know, India and China when it comes to population. And another one that's poised to explode is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which not only has like a large amount of territory, but also is poised to explode in population and economic activity, because the DRC has some of the largest world reserves of rare earth minerals and cobalt, which are used for making a lot of the technology that we are going to be needing for the 21st century. Like, you need cobalt to make liquid crystal displays, and a lot of rare earth minerals that are dug out of the Democratic Republic of Congo have been used for like the making of, like, you know, batteries and like sort of like a lot of the sort of things that you need to make high-end electronics. And so the DRC is probably poised to have a massive population growth as like that becomes a bigger and bigger part of their economic output. Yeah. Isn't the DRC one of the most politically unstable countries on earth? Yes. Yes, it is. Although that is changing. The DRC has had a lot of issues with civil war and having a fairly hard to unify country because it has very rough terrain and a lot of terrain that is basically unlivable in. And because the country, not unlivable, but it's hard to like build like, you know, cities and stuff inside of it. And furthermore, its entire political infrastructure is an artificial construct imposed upon it by the Belgians. And the Belgians were not interested in nation building. They were interested in, you know, funneling as much raw resources, specifically rubber, towards the city of Leopoldville as efficiently as possible, which means that, and then they just abruptly left. So a lot of the DRC's problems come from the fact that, it is this formerly colonized country with power structures that still exist from that period and have tons and tons of, you know, of issues from the fact that there's no like coherent nation behind it. There's many, many different types of peoples living under a very large banner with not a lot of infrastructure to build a national consciousness with. But the DRC does have some things that are turning that around. Specifically, its rare earth mineral deposits have led to, in the past, has led to a lot of these like sort of rogue mining companies, a lot of them Canadian actually, basically maintaining a system of violent warlords to ensure that they could continue having unfettered access without any regulation to these, you know, these mineral deposits. But China is investing a lot in the DRC. China is building one of the largest highway systems on Earth to basically interconnect a lot of stuff. And I don't know, like, you know, some people are saying that China is just doing the same thing that the Belgians did, just from the other direction. But other people have said that China's like just sort of like even though it is, you know, with their own selfish interest because they want to secure strategic resources, but they're doing so by just like building a fuckload of infrastructure in the DRC, which would be very useful for them in the long term. Because, you know, even if the Chinese do decide to pull out or, you know, do decide to leave, they're not invading the country. They're just like, you know, working out deals with people in the country. They will leave with like, you know, new infrastructure, especially highways and stuff like that to boot. So I don't know. That really depends upon whether or not you think that China is a benevolent or malevolent force in the world. And my argument with that is always it's complicated. But yeah, there's a lot to go through with that. But it does mean that there is a, like, as like that, if that material prosperity does sort of get to the people of the DRC, it could mean like a higher amount of sort of political stability in the long term. Is the DRC the Congo? Yes, the DRC stands for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just saying Democratic Republic of Congo over and over again would have been a mouthful. Ugh. But the DRC might be happy working with China because, as far as I can tell, like, countries are liking working with China on deals more than the United States, because the United States usually has more strings attached to their deals than China does. China's like making an economic deal or a trade deal with China or things like that usually ends up with like China doesn't care what kind of government you have, doesn't care what your human rights record is, doesn't care doesn't really care how you get the things that you're making a deal with, but they will invest money in your projects no matter what. That's why, like, for example, Saudi Arabia trades more with China now than it does with the United States. And as the sort of spoken wheel initiative, which is this idea to use like road infrastructure to basically interconnect a lot of Eurasia, and actually the world, because part of the spoken wheel initiative involves building roads into Africa, and one of the things that's going on with that is that Saudi Arabia is lobbying to get that highway running through Saudi Arabia. So this is it's part of a larger project. But yeah, the other Congo you're thinking of is just Congo, and Congo has only 6 million people living in it. Or specifically, it's called the Republic of the Congo. It's not hard to mix up, because yeah, there's the Republic of Congo and then there's the Democratic Republic of the Congo. China is also investing into an enormous direct freight railroad throughout Eurasia. Yeah. And you know what? There are a lot of countries where, even though that's sort of further empowering China, there's a lot of countries that don't mind doing that if that means that they are countering the fact that the United States has spent decades fucking with countries by basically dictating what kind of government they're allowed to have, by assassinating leaders, by invading them and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of countries that would love to see a different superpower in charge of the world. And China comes in with a lot of, fairly brass tacks deals that are yeah, we'll trade with you. No questions asked. We'll build infrastructure. We're not going to assassinate random leaders. We're not going to randomly declare that you're making weapons of mass destruction and invade you for weird esoteric reasons. They're just yeah, we'll make a deal. Which, that's the reason why a lot of countries are for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo had its president, one of its most beloved presidents in its history. I think it's I just want to get this right. Patrice Lumumba is his name. And he was assassinated by the United States in 1961. Because he was a African nationalist or a Pan-Africanist who sort of wanted to build a larger African political project that would counter the power of the colonial countries and the United States. Another example, another person who was a leader in that movement was Muammar Gaddafi, and that was why he was also target number one by the United States when stuff started going on in Libya. Let's see what we got next. This year is the 70th anniversary of the North Sea flood of 1953, which flooded major parts of the Netherlands, Belgium, and killed thousands of people. Considering how climate change is going to screw us all over, do you think that parts of Western Europe will become uninhabitable at some point? This is not a question, but a fun little fact I want to share. During the 53 flood, a part of Zeeland in the Netherlands got separated from the rest of the country by water, save for one railway line, which could only be used during low tide, so the Dutch railways used that as a lifeline. The locals called it De Badkoopsbruggen, or the bathtub railway. Interesting. I think that in many ways, like that could be the case, but also, especially the lowland countries have sort of prepared for this ahead of time. Like, the Netherlands would already be a lot more underwater than it was if it wasn't for the seawalls and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of Western European countries are rich enough that they could do more projects like that to protect themselves from sea level rise more than a lot of other countries. It'll be expensive and it'll be terrible, but I think that Europe sinking into the sea is not the most unlikely, or not the most likely of outcomes there. The flood works are not well maintained at all. Well, you're one big flood away from reinvesting in all those things, I would say. I feel like because that infrastructure exists in any case, the Netherlands are way more poised to respond to sea level rise compared to other countries. Like, I think the Dutch will handle sea level rise a lot better than, say, like, New York, when the sea level starts, like, devouring the city of New York. So Lucia asks, what's my favorite Quebecois foods? I'm a fan of drunken 4 a.m. patin. Always a good time. Also a fan of tourtière, which is a sort of like minced meat pie that you can get in Quebec. Sort of, I don't exactly know how to describe it, but it's basically like a ground, like beef that's ground to almost a paste with like a bunch of spices and stuff in it and made into a pie. It's really good. The Tories refused to condemn Tucker Carlson's call for the U.S. to invade Canada. Fuck, I didn't even know that happened. Man. I am losing touch with things. Inspired by... Did he actually do that? I no idea. I'm just hearing about this now. I have heard some people on Twitter talking about invading Canada, but I thought that was just like weirdos. I didn't think it was somebody as mainstream as Tucker Carlson. Like, my argument is that I don't think, because like there is going to be a time where the U.S. is going to come for our fresh water, because Canada's got a huge freshwater strategic reserve, and America is basically burning through all of its freshwater resources very quickly, and we are a country that does not have an extremely powerful military, at least compared to the United States, and a lot of fresh water resources. But I talked to Kelly about how this, my wife Kelly, and we talked a lot about how like Kelly thought like, oh, the United States would probably invade us to get that water at some point. And I said, I don't think so, because I think that our leaders will just sell out all of our water to the United States. Like, I think they'll just give it up. I don't think that we will need to be invaded. We'll just give it up. Like, our country is already selling our, precious freshwater reserves to the highest bidder. So they'll probably just end up doing that when the United States comes in for it. they'll start. So that's sort of the way that I think about it anyway. All right. Inspired by Stalin, Discourse on Twitter. What do I think about historians loved by Marxist-Leninist / Stalins like Parenti, Lusso, and Fur? They any good at writing history? Would you recommend anything from them? So, I don't know. I think, is it Fur? Fur is one of them. Like, I came across some of these people when I was doing my research for that. Yeah, Grover Fur. That's who you're talking about. Yeah, Grover Fur is just a naked apologetic person for Stalin. He's a straight up like con guy. Like he actively lies in his books about Stalin. He makes like every single excuse for Stalin. So yeah, that's one. I don't know anything else about Domenico Losurdo, who I think is who you're referring to here. I don't know anything. I don't know much about them. Michael Parenti is he's written some like legitimately good books, but also is he like the gray zone guy now? Like who, like something about COVID turned him into an absolute loon. Like he's like anti-vaccine and like just like posts the most like random bullshit about, like his whole grift now is anti-vaccine shit, right? You love shepherd's pies like that. Tortilla it's not quite like shepherd's pie. Like doesn't have the potatoes, for example. And I think the meat is more like, it's more, let me see if I can find a picture of it or something. Like traditional French meat pie. Yeah. We're going to go look at a Google image search of pie together, everybody. Because that's a normal thing that people do in their Twitch streams, right? Yeah, let's do this. Look at that. That's a tortilla right there. You see? It's like ground beef, and usually there's like onions and garlic and stuff in there, but there's all sorts of stuff that's mixed in. That's the old... Step Back is the only Twitch channel where we can go from talking about freaking Stalin apologist historians and go directly to meat pie. But yeah, is Michael Parenti the guy? Because Michael Parenti is the one who wrote Republican Gomorrah, right? Or American Fascists or something like that. Or am I thinking of someone else? So Michael Parenti wrote... Yeah, I was mixing up with somebody else, wasn't I? What if I have read Michael Parenti of some kind? I do know that, but I'm trying to remember what it is. Maybe I haven't read Michael Parenti. Either way, I don't really know what he has to say about Stalin, so I can't really talk about it. Who the hell am I thinking of then? Who is the weird anti-vaccine guy who wrote some decent books in the past and has now just become an absolute weirdo? Max Blumenthal. That's who I was thinking of. Oh, this makes me sad. Is John Pilger an anti-vaxxer? Man, I used to really like him. His documentaries were so good. Like in the 70s, I guess. Oh God, I did not know that John Pilger was like talked nice about Trump. God damn. He does RT stuff. God damn. That is. I guess it's like an example of like there's a sort of leftist who becomes so obsessed with anti-Americanism that they basically ignore virtually all other issues and support like brutal dictators and stuff like that just because they oppose the United States, so therefore they're friends. But yeah, it's so Max Blumenthal is the guy who has just become like because he wrote American Fascists and then became basically just a complete like anti-vaccine guy. And that's basically all he does now. He's like Glenn Greenwald, right? You don't like Christopher Hedges because he's associated with RT. I mean, it's not a great look. RT is a complicated thing to talk about, right? Because like RT is a company that, or as a like institution, has done a lot to expose some of the shitty things that America has done, and then at the same time is actively a wing of propaganda for the Russian government. Like, you can't even, like, that's not even a deniable thing. It is actively part of, like, it is an active, like, propaganda outlet for Russia. But Russia's propaganda, like, larger propaganda campaign is to basically just entirely narrowly focus on attacking the United States. And many times it's, like, not wrong, the things they say. So, you know, go with that where you will, right? Two things can be true. Russia today can be both a propaganda outlet for the Russian government and also point out American imperialism. Yep. There's the answer. So then, because like, what's it called? Like, I think of some like Redacted Tonight is like there is like a Russia Today. I don't know if Redacted Tonight is still on the air, but Redacted Tonight was like RT's attempt to do a daily show type thing with the hell's that guy's name? Lee Camp. Which I enjoyed quite a bit for a while, but then, like, you know, he started again just going into, because a lot of times these people also in their efforts to single-mindedly attack the United States will also just veer into every single conspiracy theory that they can come across as well. And so very much the like often, like, sometimes they do, you know, hit on, like, you know, actual things that are worth criticizing about the United States' like colonialist and imperial foreign policy. And then we'll also just get into like made up bullshit conspiracies that also feed into their preconceived narrative. So you do have to, like, you know, approach carefully. And that's like, honestly, when it, like people have like been talking online and stuff like that about like, how do you find the, like, this is a question I get all the fucking time. It's like, how do you choose media sources to believe and stuff like that? And my general take is, I don't believe any of them. Or I should say, I don't go into any of them with blind belief. I know, like, when you take a news source, you have to look at its editorial position. You have to look at its resources and the sort of standards it's held to, and what kind of reputation that they have to maintain. And grade stories on a sliding scale based on that. Like, for example, CNN has a strong, pro-capitalist liberal, editorial position. This is true. CNN also is a large enough institution that straight up printing a, flat out falsehood would not work. They would not go into entertaining random conspiracy theories unless it's something that has a strong the United States is specifically trying to build that up for some sort of propaganda purpose, the Iraq War or something like that. Because CNN, I know from CNN that CNN cares a lot about access, because they are one of the major institutions of the United States. They have direct access to the White House. They have a White House correspondent that can be revoked by the White House at any time. They have a network of international journalists around the world who depend on their reputation to get their reporters into the rooms of powerful people. And so they tend to try and keep themselves, in the thing. So if you know from a CNN story that is sort of the lens that they look to the world with, you can then sort of reverse engineer what's fact and what's fiction, or more in the case of that, what is where the twists are, what their sort of blinders are not looking at from all of that. Because CNN does have a lot of utility as a news source, because not a lot of news organizations have the resources and money to afford to have correspondents in basically every country on earth. So if something is happening on the other side of the world, oftentimes CNN might be the only people who actually have somebody there to report on the story. Same with BBC and stuff like that. So you have to just sort of see things that way. Because there really is no news source that doesn't have some sort of editorial position. That is literally impossible. So you have to sort of go in with eyes open about everything that you can. And honestly, with that in mind, then the people that you should be the most wary of are the news sources that do not have a reputation that rests on being they don't have any stakes involved with them lying, or at least their veracity is not something that is part of their claim. For example, there's a lot of people who are really into, and people who I respect, who seem to be really into Disclosure or Disclose TV or something like that. And Disclose TV lies all the fucking time. Disclose, is it Disclose? Or what is it? Yeah, Disclose.tv is at a terrible journalistic standard. They lie and print conspiracy theories and then don't retract them all the time. They are not a good news source. Do they sometimes report true things? Yes. But know that they have a bent towards weird conspiracy bullshit that you need to keep your eyes open about. Or the gray zone. The gray zone is just is single-mindedly focused on being anti-American, which means that they will print things that are false or that are straight up conspiracy theories or extreme twists of logic if it further advances their overall goal, which is just focusing on anti-American stuff. So just you have to be aware. That's the main thing. What do I think about Tucker Carlson wanting the USA military to invade Canada? That feels very specious to me. I don't think it's going to happen. it's something I had just heard about, and it sounds very silly. And that's why, like, a lot of those, like it's always like a centrist liberals who release those, like, you know, political position reports that show that, like, all of their favorite news sources are the most trustworthy because it agrees with their political position most, and that everything else is, like, radical and weird. And it's like, that is such a wrong way to look at news sources. There's no such thing as a neutral news source. That doesn't exist. They're made up of humans, and humans, by their very nature, cannot not have their position on the world come through in how they write about or what they prioritize or any of those things. It's just impossible. Even an AI will be programmed by somebody with a certain set of priorities, and that will affect editorial position. The only argument against America would invade Canada position is that you're underestimating the incompetency and vitriol of the U.S. government. I think that the U.S. government wouldn't need to use war to get what they wanted. I think that if they were to, if they wanted something of Canadian resources, we would just give it up immediately. We would just turn it over instantly. Because our government is so capitulationist to the United States that, like, yeah, if the United States said, like, stop making gay M&Ms or something like that, we would just stop. We would just do what they want us to do. Have you heard of Oscarville, Georgia? Do you think that you'll do an episode about forgotten American cities like that one in Tulsa? Sorry if you already have. This, I get so many questions that are like, make a video about this. I for a long time was thinking about making a video about Tulsa, especially because it had its 20th or 100th anniversary 1 or 2 years ago, but I didn't. Oscarville looks like it's another sort of prosperous black place that ended up being violently attacked by racists. Yeah, I probably should investigate something into that at some point. The city was buried under a lake, Jesus. Yeah, I'd heard about the Tulsa riots, and I was planning on making a video about that a long time ago. Probably should still. Alrighty. I'm currently working on a webcomic, and I'm curious what you and or Mia's experience with webcomics is in terms of what you've actually read and followed. I mean in terms of making, not in terms of making them. Geez. Not a lot, I'll be honest. 20th anniversary. It was 100th anniversary. That was my bad. Yeah, so I went, like, webcomics to me were a thing of, like, the ancient internet. Like, I think I used to follow... I don't even remember what the name of the comic was anymore. But there was a time where I was following a comic that was just, like, made up of all of the, like, sort of, like, archetype classes from the early Final Fantasy games. Like, I remember there being, like, a fighter and black mage as, like, the two main characters. I think there was, like, a white mage character, and the black mage character was always hitting on her. And there was sword chucks. But 8-bit theater, that's it, yeah. That was it. But other than that, I don't think I've ever like really like I've seen webcomics, but I don't think there's ever been one that I really stuck with. They're hard to follow now because they would have been easier to follow with Google Reader. But most so the thing is that most webcomics now are like the established ones have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of strips that you have to read to figure out what's going on. And furthermore, they release often enough that, that to get caught up in, to keep up on what's going on, you can't, like, there's no RSS, there's no Google Reader anymore, I just realized that I did used to follow Cyanide and Happiness pretty closely. Like what's it called? There is actually, I used to have a little bit of a relationship with Rob from Cyanide and Happiness, and there is one time a long time ago where I gave him an idea for a comic strip and it got into a Cyanide and Happiness comic. Did I ever watch Homestar Runner? I did not. My wife did, but I did not. So this is a long time ago, but there is a Cyanide and Happiness. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see if I can find the Cyanide and Happiness that is, that I inspired, because my my handle at the time was Huitzilopochtli, which is the name of the Aztec god of war, because I've always been a nerd. And I told him the joke, and I was like, that would actually be a pretty funny like Cyanide Happiness comic. And Rob was like, oh shit, can I use that? And I was like, sure, you just have to use my name in the comic somewhere. And he did. Like, I thought it would just be like, like give credit somewhere in the strip, but then he actually like put it in there. Let me see if I can find it. It's a very old one, so I'd have to find it. Yeah, here it is. I found it. Haha. So this is the Cyanide and Happiness that I inspired. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we go. Very funny. Very comic. Super funny. I'm a very clever person. But you see, this one made no... The first one would have been... the first panel makes no sense unless you know that like I asked him to put my name in it somewhere. Anyways. Good old Cyanide and Happiness. There's some that I also used to follow back when I was like, more normie, like... what's that one that everyone seemed to like? The one with like the stick figures that's made by like the engineer / scientist guy. That what was it? I don't even remember what that one's called anymore. But it was like a stick figure comic that was made XKCD. Yeah, that one was okay for a while. And there was another one too. This one I actually do still read every once in a while. And it's one that's made by Zach Weinersmith. I'm trying to remember what that one's called now. What is Zach Weinersmith's comic called? Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. That one's all right. sign and have it. All these people say, yeah, they age poorly. Comedy in general ages very poorly. That's sort of part of the bargain. Did a sketch making fun of non-binary people a few years back. Well, that's no good. Keep in mind, I haven't talked to Rob since like probably like 2008. So this was a long, long time ago. How close is Mexico to being invaded or cooed? I know rhetoric from the U.S. far right has portrayed Mexico as a failed state for decades, but they've never backed down on it. With the war in Ukraine, they've compared the border crisis to being invaded. They've never... See, like, you have to keep in mind that that sort of border rhetoric in the United States is entirely about racism. It's entirely about just using these words as excuses to maintain a racial caste system in America. There's like nothing like there is like American border people do not care about like Mexican politics or like the fate of the country of Mexico. The chances of like the United States invading Mexico is very low now. So that's the way that I would see that, I think. Like the whole border patrol, like the whole way that Americans politicize the border with Mexico is entirely in their minds a domestic thing. It's not a foreign policy thing. It's a culture war. It's trying to excuse racism against Mexicans. All right. Let's see. I started watching BoJack Horseman recently. If you've not watched that adult cartoon, it's about an anthropomorphic horse who was a famous actor like 30 years ago, but now he's depressed because his career has stagnated. I have watched BoJack Horseman. I enjoyed BoJack Horseman. Do you think there's too much media about the experience of being a successful cis white man who's unhappy in spite of his success? I'm enjoying the show, but like 4 episodes I've watched so far, BoJack's problems are with his relationships and mental state. He never has to worry about money or anything that might affect his actual material conditions in any way. I think that you need to give it some more time. BoJack Horseman does a very good job as the show matures of showing that BoJack is very clearly in the wrong about everything that he's doing. By the end, like, it's very clear that BoJack is the bad guy, despite the fact that he's a protagonist. And I don't think that I feel like it does that. That's fine. I feel like it's fine. Like that kind of stuff is, whatever. But I do think that we don't necessarily need protagonists to be people that we like, and protagonists can be bad people. So does our society still have way too many stories about affluent white guys who are sad despite the fact that they're like buried in money? Sure. Maybe we should just not have all media be written by affluent white guys who are depressed despite the fact that they're buried in money. I think the writers' rooms need to have a little bit more diversity going on in order to have those kinds of things. It sounds a lot like how people misunderstand Breaking Bad. Yeah. Breaking Bad is another example of the main character is not a good person. Just because they are the protagonist, i.e. they are the source of the action, does not mean that they are a good person. And in our like post MCU media environment, where now it's considered like a problem if you have a protagonist who's not good, because now that is you like one of the things that super pissed me off was the discourse surrounding the movie Joker, and how like it showed how like our Marvel movie brain has just completely turned us into fucking children, and we can't process that there might be a film where the main character is not somebody who should be a hero and emulated, and that's okay. I think I'm just bitter because I'm like one of some people who actually thought that movie was interesting, but you know, whatever. But I do think that the main reason that people are starting to think this way is because Marvel movies have taken over our entire way of thinking about film and media in general. And so, I don't know, it seems like we've cornered ourselves in this media environment where none of our stories can have any complexity or any earnesty, because it has to be filled with quick, quippy humor that is that undercuts any source of tension. And every character has to be completely not problematic and perfect in every single way, or else if you have a main character who has problems and who has like a legitimately bad personality, you are encouraging that. You are condoning, and you are saying that that is a model of behavior, which is how like a 6-year-old thinks of movies. And unfortunately, I feel like we've gone through this like thing of like cultural neoteny, which it's sort of like, okay, I should probably just like clarify, neoteny is not a common word. Neoteny is a term when a creature evolves in a way where they have different life stages as part of their growth, and because of some reason or another, it's advantageous for them to not transition to their adult form as part of the species. The most famous one is probably the axolotl. The axolotl is a salamander in its nymph stage that evolved so that it never matures into its adult form. And I feel like that's happened with a lot of media today, where we now think that all media has to be made up of these like perfect paragons of civic and moral virtue, which is, one, impossible to uphold and tell an interesting story, because people who have flaws are like part of what make characters interesting. But two, means that like everything is going to be like a baby show for children, because we can't deal with moral complexity or gray areas at all. And that's why so many fucking shows and movies suck now, is because we're just like, this is the way Marvel has like conditioned us, so that is the only way that we expect media to exist. And that's why people like freak out when someone makes something like Joker, which is supposed to be like a sort of reference to the 1970s sort of movies. I think it's got a lot of references to movies like Taxi Cab and stuff like that, which are movies about people and how they become like broken and deranged people who do horrible things. And that's what Joker is about. Joker is about how you take a person and turn them into a like psychopathic murderer, which is Taxi Cab's the comedy. Taxi Driver, that's it. And so, but yeah, like that's the point of Joker, is like how like the worst actions that happen are from people who like, how a broken society that lets people like fall through the cracks creates the sort of purveyors of mass violence that we have today. That's the whole point of Joker, is how a society failed somebody to the point where they became a monster. and that there were many places that somebody could have come in and stopped it, but it didn't, because we've stripped away all of the things that kind of keep society together. And people interpreted that movie through their fucking like Marvel movie brain as, this movie is saying that what Joker is doing is justified. And it's like, oh my god, no. Fuck off. Anyways. So, thank you for the 2 British pounds. Did I like House back in the 00s? Yeah. I seem to recall liking the first handful of seasons. There was even though, you know, the show is probably aged terribly, but I enjoyed House early on. There was a period where I think they like replaced most of the supporting cast where I kind of stopped watching, but I enjoyed a good chunk of it. And there's another character. House was, you know, not a good person. Although I would say that House was a show that sort of did the sort of thing wrong, because House was a show that had a main character who was genuinely an unlikable person, but they made an effort to point out that even though he was a terrible person, he solved all these cases and saved all these lives, and didn't really make the effort to point out that the things that he's doing are wrong, that are fucked up. And they sort of got too into it's sort of like in some ways it's sort of like Rick and Morty, where because it didn't although I think Rick and Morty did it better, where like, you know, leaning onto this is not a good person, they are doing destructive behavior both to themselves and others, doesn't really get punished much in House, while in Rick and Morty, especially as it kind of matured a little bit, also does do that. But I don't know. Shows. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Turns out that I'm a fan of, or I wouldn't call myself a fan of like Rick and Morty, but it is a show that I have watched, and I don't follow its fans enough to, like, you know, hate it for its fans. I just, you know, it's a thing that I absorbed through my eyeballs, and that is part of the show that, you know, also could have been done better, but I think was done better than what they did with House. Yeah, people need to get through their heads that a character's behavior can be understandable but still wrong. Yes. I feel like that's kind of part of emotional maturity. And that's sort of the part that we don't really let us do in media anymore. It's sort of a thing that, it's actually sort of the reason why a lot of our political discourse has fallen the fuck apart too, is that we have like lost the capacity as a civilization to understand another person without necessarily agreeing with their position, you know? Anyways, that was a big distraction. Let's see. Rick and Morty has good episodes, but the fans ruin it. Yeah, I guess so. I don't follow the Rick and Morty subreddit. I don't really follow discourse about Rick and Morty online. It's a show that I watch and don't talk about, and that seems to work well for me. Hey, Matt, thank you for the $5 super chat. I think the Marvel brain is why you have folks who see Homelander and Omni-Man and say, well, yeah, Superman could beat them up, though. Yeah. I mean, the fact that I feel like this swings both ways, because not only do you have people who condemn obviously bad characters you're not supposed to agree with as saying that it's like holding them up as a standard of what should be good, but then you also have like stuff like, yeah, like Homelander and Omni-Man, who are clearly like villains and like monsters. And then some people, because, you know, Marvel brain, they've decided to latch on and be like, actually, this person is a good person, which is wild because both of those characters are very blatantly coded as like the villains of the show, and the thing that they are doing is wrong. But yeah. The main writer, yeah, I did see that. The main writer of Rick and Morty is what's it called? Justin Roiland got arrested. They kicked him off the show though. Who knows what the fuck's gonna happen with the show then? Because they're gonna recast like half the voices on the show. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. Dan Harmon is also like, you know, not exactly squeaky clean himself. He's got a pretty checkered past when it comes to specifically some creepy sexual advances and stuff like that. Although he owned up to it in a way that is respectable, but you know, isn't great. Yeah. I also don't watch it in a way that I get at, like, what's it called? I torrent Rick and Morty, so I'm not like exactly contributing to their pocketbooks in any meaningful way. But anyways, see if I have time to do one more question. What's up with conservatives and violent media? Thatcher banned the video nasties and her government censored the Ninja Turtles, all while literally starting a war to win re-election and general right-wing fixation on violence against wrongdoers. How can one's ideology have such violent tendencies and also be like, well, we can't have violence in movies and TV? I mean, yeah, it's the same reason why, in my mind, it's the same reason why we don't like seeing, skin and bones and flesh and stuff like that on meat in the grocery store. We want to reap the rewards of violence inflicted on others, but we don't want to see what that actual impact is on the creatures that we do it to. That's the same with international violence. They want to reap the imperial rewards of violence. They don't want to see the horrible things they're doing to others. And I feel like in a lot of conservative media, that crackdown on violence is very, it's not exactly entirely conservative. It was both sides of the aisle in the 80s and stuff like that. It's very much like Christian, trying to keep the children innocent or whatever. It's silly. Have you heard Netflix is capping members from password sharing? Is it time to pirate and torrent again? Hell yeah. It's always been time to pirate and torrent. Do it all the time. I retweeted something just the other day that was like, Netflix is going to finally teach people born after 1998 how to torrent or what a torrent is. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. What's it called? I was a kid growing up in the Napster and LimeWire days. I'm ready to start stealing shit again. I mean, as a non-American, I already have to, because half of media is not on streaming platforms that we have access to. So, yeah, we don't have whatever streaming service has a Rick and Morty on it. So I just have to torrent it, because I'm sure as fuck not getting cable. Yeah, do what you want because a pirate is free. You are a pirate. All right. I'll level with you guys right now. So that was the end of a question. We have like 3 minutes left in the podcast, and I really have to go to in the stream, and I really have to go to the bathroom. So I think I'm going to end just a couple minutes early, and I will find somebody cool to raid. Sorry about not giving you guys like the last little bit, but I think I think you guys can forgive me. Let's raid. What's Left Flank Vets doing? See if they're actually active. Let's see. Come on. I hate that Twitch now has this thing where it's like preparing your stream. All right, they're not live yet, so let's just raid Lumiru. Let's do that. Does anyone know what this like preparing your stream thing is all about? Anyways. Everybody, it's been real. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I will see you guys next week. Cheers.